Counties have a lot to consider about the costs that they're not even thinking about. And
Mhm.
decommissioning wise, we're talking at least $1 million per turbine. These new taller turbines could be even more than that. You can't recycle that much steel. You can't restore the land back to normal land use. It's
Right.
just impossible. They're not even required to in the lease. They only take the top 48 inches of concrete out, leave the rest. So what is that doing to the groundwater? There's a lot of natural springs,
Mhm.
water flows in Carroll County in the mountains there. Those will be disrupted. Uh, it's just a mess with all these leases too. There are so many things built in. Anybody who's considering signing one of these leases, they sign their life away. They sign their land away for generations. They lose control of the land. There's huge amounts of easements. They may think they're getting a little bit of money, but some wind turbines companies will use the tactics of keeping one turbine shut down because they're paid based on what that wind farm produces. And plus, on top of this, we're talking about if you build an industrial wind facility, you're also going to have to build transmission lines to transport that energy. So you're going to have eminent domain issues across the mountainside. You're going to see huge swaths of trees cut down. It's going to materially alter parts of Carroll County in ways a lot to consider. And our number one request of counties who are considering this is A, put a moratorium on so you can study all these things and hear from everybody. Make sure that the county commissioners do their diligence before you do this and
Right.
realize what they're actually doing to the residents because their decision will, residents of that county will have to live with it for decades to
Right.
come. You just don't want that kind of thing down in Carroll County. And a number of counties around the country are not just putting on a moratorium, they're outright banning them.
Mhm. Yes, the
I don't
list is
know,
growing.
the list is growing. And I'm not sure what happens typically is the wind company will go around and try to get a number of people to sign leases, promising them money, promising them all the moon, basically. And then they will help those landholders threaten to sue the county if they don't approve a wind
Mhm.
facility, so that they're saying you're denying us our right to do with our property what we want. Well, it's kind of backwards if you think about it. Why would it's blackmail. And if something wasn't allowed in the first place, then they're not being denied anything that they weren't denied before. So it's a disingenuous legal argument as well, but it's a tactic that is commonly used, and it's probably going to be used there as well. They should pay to the
Yes.
county. In fact, there's wind turbines in Kansas now that pay less property tax than I pay on my house. And think about that. These wind turbines cost $4 or $5 million to build. My house is not even nowhere close to that, a mere fraction of that. But I'm paying more property tax on my home than those turbines are contributing. So, and on top of that, they get so heavily subsidized.
Story.
Uh,
Could you explain what is called trespass zoning?
sure, when a county commission zones for something, particularly wind energy, wind turbines, um, they're not considering the fact that some of the hazards trespass onto adjacent property. Folks who have signed leases accept the responsibility for those dangers, such as the disintegration of blades, ice throws, stray voltage, um, uh, sound issues, things of that nature. However, the adjacent property owners who do not sign the leases don't sign up for those hazards. But when a county creates zoning by creating setbacks that are too small and restrictions that don't protect those adjacent landowners, they are basically in violation, trespass zoning. They're allowing that uh, hazard to trespass onto their property. And so a lot of times you'll hear the leaseholders, those who have signed the leases with the wind companies in many of these counties, say, well, I get to do whatever I want to with my own private land. But they're not considering what the neighbors next door want to do with their land. And sound is a huge issue because it can echo for a long way. This infrasound, the low frequency sound, can carry for 9 to 10 miles. So a 1,200 or 1,500 foot setback from a turbine will allow dangerous infrasound to penetrate your property and the walls of your home. In fact, there's a fellow down in Coffee County, Kansas. His name is Steve Milliken, and he admits he should have fought harder to keep the windmills out. He is now surrounded by wind turbines, and his wife has seizures and all sorts of problems due to the windmill, migraine headaches. And it just started once they were surrounded by these wind turbines. And the sound is a big issue. The shadow flicker, the blinking lights on the top of the turbines. There are just so many things that are annoyances and health hazards with these things that can trespass onto your property. If you are not a leaseholder and you don't want it there, you really don't have any say unless you make the county commission and set setbacks that are far enough. I really would not be comfortable with anything less than a mile from, not from the property, it's not from the house, but from the property line itself. With regard to sound, we had several experts from Michigan and Iowa who are audio experts come in and testify about the infrasound. And so a 1 mile setback just for general safety, because the ice throws, and when a blade disintegrates, we found up in Marshall County, Kansas, when some of that fiberglass was shed off those blades, it fell apart. It was over 2,000 feet. So just from that safety hazard alone, you need to be at least 3/4 of a mile away. But we found with the sound can travel a long way, and particularly in the mountains, it can echo down through those canyons quite some distance. So a minimum of 1.25 miles would be helpful. It may not completely mitigate issues, but it would be helpful for the adjacent property owners. And I want to emphasize property line, because your house may sit in the middle of, say, 10 acres, but if they measure the hazardous trespass zoning to your house, it means part of your property is still being affected by those hazards and drifting over onto your property. You can't use your property the way you'd like to. So the only mitigation, according to the experts that I've talked to, is distance. And the farther away from the turbine, the safer you're going to be. And down there in your area, the average annual wind speed in Carroll County is about 8 miles per hour. The average wind speed needs to be above 10 miles per hour. In other words, those turbines don't even start producing electricity until the wind speed's above 10 miles an hour, and they don't produce their full designed nameplate capacity electricity until the wind speed's 25 miles an hour. Well, in your area, 200 days per year or more, there's not that much wind. So the only reason for these things to exist is for these federal subsidies. And the Inflation Reduction Act under the Biden administration fully restored those subsidies, and those subsidies go out in perpetuity. So the only reason they're grabbing land there, it's not because it can produce energy. It's just for the subsidies alone, period. Once these structures are there, like in California, they don't take them down. They just leave them in a broken down state, and then they'll put a new one right next door to it. And pretty soon you've got an eyesore in an area that's, well, Arkansas calls itself the natural state for a good reason.
Is the money going to the schools? And if I remember correctly, Kansas has put those numbers to the paper of what they should have been paid and what the wind company actually has paid.
It's a loss of millions and millions and millions of dollars, giving them a property tax abatement of 10 years. They come on the rolls 10 years after they start operating. Well, the problem with that is they never pay full property tax price, because they also get accelerated depreciation. So by the time they come onto the rolls, they are almost fully depreciated. So they're paying a mere pittance. of what they should pay in property tax value. In addition, they will say, well, we're going to give payment in lieu of tax
Right.
or a pilot payment. And typically that is also a mere fraction of what they typically would pay for property taxes. So the schools are missing out, the counties are missing out. They'll claim numbers. They will give a number like, oh, we're gonna donate $750,000 to the county. Well, if you actually do the math, it should be more like $17 million in property tax they should pay to the county. The bottom line is the best way to handle energy is to get the most energy using the least resources. Well, we're doing exactly the opposite with wind and solar. We're using massive amounts of land and massive amounts of cost to produce very little energy and unreliable energy. It's just a bad idea from the get-go.
Yeah.
The biggest thing they push is they go to people, you have property rights. You have property rights. Don't tell them what you can and can't do on your own property. Everybody has property rights, don't we? Like when I was county judge, and I imagine every county judge in this state has done the same thing. I have issued orders violating property rights. It's happening all the time. Every summer it happens. It'll happen 20 years from now in the summer. What is it? The county judge is going to issue a fire ban. Isn't that telling you what you can or cannot do on your own property? Excuse me? Why? To protect the other property owners. It's not to protect your property. Excuse my language, but hell, if you want to burn your own farm up, your own house, hurt your family, that's your business. However, when it crosses that property line onto my property, now you're hurting me, my family, the other neighbors, everybody else. You're destroying their property rights. So how far do property rights go? What's wrong with having regulations that protects everybody's property rights, as I call it, not just the select few? Where we're at up there, there have some 50 different property owners that have signed all the leases. Now you can't count that as 50 separate because that's husband and wives count as one each. So it's down to 25. Of those, there's only some 10 or 11 that are actually having wind turbines on their farms. And guess what, folks? None of them live there. They don't have to put up with all this. The closest one is like 5 miles away. And other than that, most of them are out-of-state property owners. All they're looking at is the money they're going to get, and to heck with the rest of us up there that came there to live a nice life. How's it going to affect you? Well, where we live at, there is no public water available, and I cannot foresee it ever in my great-grandchildren's lifetime because we're so rural and so thinly populated up there. First thing that happened to me in March of 23 when I heard about this was, what about my wells and my springs? Because everybody up there on the mountain, our only source of water are wells. I'm lucky. I had 2 wells. And I've got 5 year-round springs that flow great water, and I have 2 spring-fed ponds. The reason I said had, because this blast, it was either the end of November or December of last year, my primary well to my house, stops producing water. So I call the well company out. They come out, they check it. Art's the guy, well, boy, we've been doing good. Had that property since '95. He got us to test it and see if we got a bad pump on there, wiring, whatever's wrong with it, foot valve. Art said, okay. Richard, yeah. What's been going on around here? I said, what you mean? He said, well, I sell a lot of construction. I said, okay, so what? He says, your well's dry. I said, do what? He says, what's been going on? Now, this well has been there, from what I understand, for over 75 years. Back in 2012, we had a drought, severe drought. Most of my neighbors, their wells and our springs either got to low production or dried up temporarily. This well continued producing water as it ever had for the years I had been there, which is that's 17 years. Now, it's dry. The only thing, they haven't even started construction for the towers yet. They're just across the road from me now, building just the roads to them and getting the foundation, getting the ground ready for them, and it's dried up. I've contacted a lawyer about it. Logically, it's their fault. My lawyer told me, Richard, just drill your own well. Because by the time we're dealing with a company that's international. They're based out of Toronto, Canada, and Shanghai, China. It's Brookfield Renewables, over a $300 billion company. How the heck am I gonna fight a 300? He says, Richard, just go drill your well. It's gonna cost you some, what's it gonna cost you? I said, I've already checked. It's 25 if I'm lucky, but most probably close to 75, 50 to 75,000 to get the well drilled up there. And that's without a guarantee of water. Because I'm gonna have to go down my other well down in the valley. It's almost 1,100 foot. And I'm 125 foot, so I'm gonna have to go at least some 1,500 foot to start with, to hopefully get water. And then is it good? As everybody who's got a well knows, not necessarily. And that's a fact. Like you said, by the time they got through with you, Richard, if you win the case, it'll be cheaper to drill your own well after they get through raking you over the coals with the experts and everything. Another one, what happens with these farms? How do they invade your property rights? This is the Mullen family farm in Rexville, New York. Linda and Richard Mullen family farm. It's a premium hay, dairy, and beef operation. It had been generations in the family. I've spoken live with the individuals. On their property, there's a wind farm that is over a mile, and she said closer to 2 miles away from them, had a fire. These shards of glass, fiberglass, flew onto their field. They cannot even bale the hay on it. They cannot walk across those 100 and something acres without shoes on because of going into their feet. It cannot be cleared up. This palace that was in March of 23, so the winter of 23, 24, rather than selling hay, they had to purchase hay for the beef and dairy cattle to the tune of in excess of $150,000 to feed their own cattle. And that is fact. Not the only story. We can go on and on with stories. Late in Iowa, she had hers, 2 of them, they were on her farm. And this was in the newspaper just in the less than a year. As she put it, the worst decision I've ever made in my life. My grandchildren will never forgive me for it, because within a year, both of the wind turbines caught on fire and contaminated, from what I understand, her entire farm of some few hundred acres. So where's the private property rights? They had put all this out about the quote-unquote, the RJPs were inundated with calls about what the heck are y'all gonna do, zoning in our county. There was never nothing mentioned ever about zoning in Carroll County, most probably the same here. People in rural counties, we don't want zoning, period. What I do want is protection of my property rights. I want my property rights protected. It was this year, we voted on another moratorium. Let me see, oh, that's this year, because this is March 13th letter from an attorney for the wind company, threatening our JPs that if they voted for the moratorium, they'd be sued again. Well, the second one, it passed. We just finally got the 3rd reading, and we now have a 5-year moratorium on it.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's all I can say. And then the money coming in, where's it come from? Federal tax credits. That's what they're here all about. Senator Thompson brought that up about the money's coming in. This project here in Carroll County is estimated some $400 million is the number that the wind company has given out to us. It was 300, but then it went to 400. 30% plus of that, which is what's that, $120 million on the bottom side, from what I understand, is how much they're going to receive in our federal tax dollars to do this, to hurt our property, and in my opinion, take away my property rights, period. This is found online. Have y'all ever heard about Warren Buffett? In 2023, he was worth some approximately $121 billion. He is the CEO of, make sure I get it right, Berkshire Hathaway. One of their main things is alternative energy. Windmills, they have a lot of them. No ifs, ands, buts, and here's a man who owns them. He'll tell you up front, without the tax subsidies, they're not worth it. See this? This is a copy of a lawsuit against Jennifer McCormick in her position as tax assessor in Dewey County, Oklahoma. Why? Because once they got the tax bill, they didn't want to pay what they promised they were going to pay, so I figure. So therefore now, and this is filed, it goes back I think originally to 2018 or 2019, it's still in court. They might have settled it recently. They're hoping they come out not owing the wind company money, much less their county making money. And the worst part is, some of the schools that figure they were getting the money, so they spend it and put themselves in debt now. Call your JPs, and remember, your district JP represents you, but it's every JP in your county that represents you. One of them can't do anything. All your JPs vote for or against them, so call every one of them. We do. They get tired of hearing from us. But guess what? One can't do anything. That's why you got a whole bunch of them. Every one of you JPs represents everybody in the county. And with that said, I'll turn it over to George. Have I done all right, George?
You're done great.
Time for me to sit down.
I'm not going to stand like Richard. Since I've got a lot of topics to cover, and I may stand on occasion.
All right. He's younger than me, by the way.
I think one of the first things that I would like to impress upon everybody is the size of these wind turbines. And now we're speaking based on our personal experience and knowledge on what's going on in Carroll County. We'd like to share that information with you. We've also done a lot of research, as it will be clear when we get finished. And a lot of that research we're willing to share with anybody who wants that. You just, let Angela or Richard or me know, or write down your name, email address, which we will keep private. We won't share with anybody. We'll be happy to send what information we have to help you make your decisions, or to help your JPs make their decisions. But getting back to the size, in Carroll County, there are going to be a total of 30 wind turbines. 26 of them are going to be about 650 feet tall. That's about 100 feet taller than the tallest skyscraper in Little Rock. The nacelle, which is where the generator is like about the size of an extended school bus generator inside it, filled with combustible oils which leak out onto the property. I like to describe it as an oil can on a lightning rod, because they catch on fire. They catch on fire not only because they get struck by lightning, but also because it's an industrial machinery. It's a piece of industrial machinery. It's not some pretty little Dutch windmill. It's an industrial wind turbine generating electricity. A standard size wind turbine, not counting the foundation, weighs about 240 tons. You count the tower, the nacelle where the generator is, and the blades. The blades are hundreds of feet long. They're made out of wood and fiberglass. They deteriorate. They have to be replaced every 4 or 5 years. While they're deteriorating, they will shred. You've seen pictures up there. They will shred pieces of fiberglass that can travel miles. They also accumulate ice. They can throw ice. They can throw ice a mile because they're spinning. At 19 revolutions per minute, the tips are traveling about 200 miles an hour. So they're dangerous. Which brings me to the first topic I was supposed to cover. This year, the Arkansas General Assembly passed Act 945, the Arkansas Wind Energy Development Act. It is not a ban on the construction of wind turbines or wind farms, but it's a regulation on their construction. I want to express my appreciation to Senator Bart Hester and Representatives James Eaton and Brad Hall for sponsoring it in the Senate and in the House. A lot of research went into generating the act. 48 states in the United States regulate wind turbine farms in one shape or form or another. About 830 counties and municipalities regulate wind farms. we didn't research all 830, I can tell you that, but we got basic information from the research that we did. We spent months doing that research, and the act is based on that. It's a reasonable regulation on the construction of wind farms, and a large part of how that act came about was based on what happened to us in Carroll County. The very first thing that the act does is it requires the wind company to let everybody know what's going on. In Carroll County, they approached all these landowners that Richard was talking about, got them to sign lease agreements. All the lease agreements contain non-disclosure provisions, which prohibited the landowner from telling anybody other than his lawyer and his accountant that he had signed a lease agreement. He couldn't tell his neighbor, couldn't tell the county officials, and that's done for a number of reasons. First of all, the wind company doesn't want you to know what I'm paying your neighbor so that you try to get that much or more. And secondly, they don't want you or anybody else to know that I'm planning to build a wind farm, because they know that there'll be opposition to the wind farm. So the first thing that Act 945 does is it requires the wind company to outline what it's going to do, publish it, put copies of, they have to file an application for a permit with the Public Service Commission. A copy of that application has to go into every public library, and they have to notify people that live around the wind farm. They have to notify them up to 4 miles away. And that right there is the reason why they have to notify them up to 4 miles away, because that's karst terrain, limestone. What happens on my property if I dynamite, if I build a large structure, it damages the water aquifers, the underground water streams that feed our wells and our surface springs, and it can go 4 and 5 miles away. The damage that was done to your well could have been caused by something that was done as far as a mile away. And so these people, they don't have the right to stop the project from going forward, but they have the right to know that it's going to go forward. The act also requires that certain construction techniques be used, that certain permits have to be obtained, state agencies have to be notified. Right now in Arkansas, the only regulation that's taking place for the construction of the wind farms in this state are stormwater runoff and game and fish. The largest structures being built in the state, and they're stormwater runoff and game and fish, and that's it.
What was the second thing you said?
Pardon?
Besides the water, what was the other
Game
thing?
and fish.
Game and fish?
And I'll tell you what the game and fish does, because they're also regulated by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So the state game and fish basically says, feds, well, you're just going to watch whatever you do, and that's what we're going to do. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife is concerned about bat habitats, because bats are an important species, regulating insect growth and how it impacts agriculture in our state. Eagles and golden eagles, as well as the bald eagle, and other birds, because these things kill bats and eagles and other birds. And there are many instances, and when a bird is killed, an eagle or golden eagle, the wind company is supposed to notify the federal government. They get what's called a take permit. They get to kill a certain number of birds before they get fined. And there are many stories about how they hire people to, in the middle of the night, to go out and bag these birds and hide them so they don't have to count them and turn them into the government.
Documented.
The Act 945 requires there be an economic impact assessment. And that's not just, an environmental impact assessment. That's just not how it impacts the environment. It also, how does it impact property values? How does it impact the water system? How does it impact aviation? Shadow flicker. Now, what is shadow flicker? When these blades are turning and the sun is shining through them, and I'm sitting here in my house and I see this constant flicker. The Act regulates how much of that I have to put up with every year. There's an application process. Act also requires that at the end of the life of the wind farm, they have to be decommissioned, they have to be torn down. The land has to be returned to the same shape it was in before, down to 48 inches. Trees don't have to be replanted, but they can't just leave them piled up like that. Now, a lot of the lease agreements that people sign say, we will decommission the wind farm when the wind farm is no longer generating electricity. And we will post a bond to make sure that we have enough money to do that. That's what the lease companies, the wind companies do. They put that in the lease agreement. They will post a bond. But they don't post that bond for 20 years. That's assuming they're even around in 20 years. And they determine how much that bond needs to be. Not you, the landowner, with whom they signed the lease agreement, but the wind company. The act that was passed by the General Assembly says, no, you have to come up with a decommissioning plan now before you build it. You have to tell us how much it's going to cost, and a third party has to determine how much it's going to cost. You have to post a bond now, and every 5 years, the state come along and say, we want you to update that bond based on current prices. The Act also requires the wind company to carry insurance. For these people, for example, that live in New York, that had fiberglass all over their hayfield, there has to be insurance to cover that. There has to be, in Carroll County, Richard and I went to see the local fire marshal. And we asked him, okay, assume this thing catches on fire, what are you going to do? Well, George, I'm going to drive my pickup truck up there and I'm just going to watch it burn. Well, if it's spinning at 19 revolutions per minute, and it's fiberglass and wood, and it catches on fire, it's not just going to sit there and spin and burn. It's going to throw that burning fiberglass and wood thousands of feet. These in Carroll County, and if they're built here just outside of Leslie, they're on top of wooded ridges. Those forests are going to catch on fire. We had, while they were constructing, while they were deforesting, clearing the land to put these wind turbines in, a fire got started. We think we know how, but we don't have enough evidence to accuse them of something improper. But anyway, it took, 4 different agencies put out that fire? 5.
Count the Forestry Commission.
How many hours?
Like 15 hours, I think it was.
And that's before it got into the woods.
Yep. It was a grass fire. They classified it as, I got the reports, classified as a grass fire.
The act requires that there be a public hearing, not only before the Arkansas Public Service Commission, but the wind company must come to the community and hold public hearings. And the act mandates that they have to be substantive. They can't just be some pro forma, okay, this is what we're doing. They have to sit down and explain what they are doing. What they did in Carroll County was they just showed up and they said, okay, if you want to talk about eagles, you go talk to that desk. If you want to talk about stormwater, you go talk to that desk. They split us up so that I couldn't hear what was going on over there, and they couldn't hear what was going on over here. Divide and conquer.
And no more than one person or a couple. If there was more than that couple there together, that person, you'll have to stand over there. When I get through with them, then I'll talk to you. There's no conversation.
Now, the act does provide the regulation. There are also setback requirements. A setback requirement under the act says that from the base of the wind turbine to the nearest property line has to be at least 2,500 feet. to the nearest school, nursing home, church, city limit, it's gotta be 1 mile. Now, the wind company says, well, that's just ridiculous. That's just ridiculous. Well, that's not ridiculous, especially when you see when the turbine manufacturers themselves say to their workers, if you're working on a turbine and it starts going haywire, if it catches on fire, you're to go upwind at least 1 kilometer, 0.6 of a mile upwind until, in fact, if there's a thunderstorm that comes through, you're to leave the wind farm and go upwind at least 1 kilometer, 0.6 of a mile. Most of these are made in Europe. That's why they're using kilometers. You're to abandon the wind farm and go upwind.
Until 30 minutes after it has passed.
Now, Act 945 is not a ban. We've had presentations in other counties. There are wind company. RWE is interested in building a wind farm here. RES, Renewable Energy Solutions, trying to build a wind farm in Washington County. There's a wind company trying to build a wind farm in Independence County. Triple Oaks trying to build wind farms down in the Delta. So the act is not preventing these wind companies from building their wind farms. So what we think and what we did in Carroll County was we got a 5-year moratorium. We can't prevent the construction of the wind farm that's already under construction. The act exempts wind companies that already have wind farms under development. And by under development, it means that they're already under construction. If they've already started the federal and state permitting process, there is no state permitting process other than the stormwater permit. Or if they've already signed lease agreements. So if RWE has already signed lease agreements here in Searcy County, they would be exempt under the act. And the act goes on to say that each municipality, each county, each town can pass their own regulations regarding wind farms, so long as those regulations are not less strict than what is in the act. And so Searcy County, just like Carroll County, and the act hasn't even become effective yet. The act doesn't technically become effective until August. And a lot of counties have already started passing moratoriums. Or you say, well, why should we pass a moratorium if Act 945 is providing us all this protection? First of all, it doesn't protect you against any wind farms that are already under development. A moratorium would do that. But when I went to Little Rock and I went before these Senate committees and met with senators behind closed doors, and we talked about this wind regulation, and they tried to get it changed. Lobbyists were involved at every step of the way, and those lobbyists are already trying to undermine Act 945. They're already setting up interim study groups with the legislators trying to get Act 945 changed, to weaken it. What we think a county should do, especially in the Ozarks, is to take the time to evaluate how is a wind farm going to impact the county. Learn from the mistakes that we are making and have made in Carroll County. Learn from the things that we are doing in Carroll County, and learn from the counties down in the Delta. From what can be done in case you do want a wind farm. There's no need to rush through this, because once these wind farms are built, they're going to impact this county or whatever county which they're being built in for the next 40, 50, 60 years. So what's wrong with taking a few years to decide whether or not this is what is best for Searcy County? Okay. A wind farm will impact the community. It will cause neighbor to be against neighbor. It will cause family members, it's done it in Carroll County, to be against family members. It's a matter of my property rights are more important than your property rights. My greed is more important than your property rights. And a lot of these landowners, as Richard has pointed out, don't even live here. They'd like to make, I own this property up on this ridge, I'd like to make some money off of it instead of just paying taxes. And that's what's driving. Now, I want to cover a couple of other things. Now, recently, we had a quote-unquote debate on the local radio station with a representative of RWE. And I've read the article in the Mountain Maze about, that was written probably by RWE, and they talked about they wanted to be open and transparent. But in that radio program, the fellow said, we're not going to tell you whether or not we've already signed any lease agreements. Open and transparent. We're not, in other words, we're not going to tell you whether or not we're subject to Act 945. Open and transparent. And he also said, I've never seen restrictions like Act 945, and we're going to do something about that. He came right out on the radio, basically said, we're going to see if we can't change the law. Well, he may not have seen restrictions like that, but his company certainly has. Because I've researched that company, and they've seen the same sort of restrictions that are in Act 945, and so that's just a ridiculous argument. Another thing I want to make about, another comment I want to make about property rights. I believe in property rights. I believe everybody should be able to do on their property what they want to do on their property. But I believe we all have property rights. And I believe what I do on my property, I know what I do, if some things that I might do on my property are going to impact my neighbor. And if I want to be a good neighbor, I have to take that into consideration. The JPs in Searcy County, as the JPs in every county, have a responsibility to try to balance the interest between the individual's property rights and the property rights of the community. A wind farm will damage the community. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The promise of these property taxes, I mean, the wind company will come in and say, we're going to generate all these property taxes, you'll be able to improve your schools and all this infrastructure. Well, as Richard pointed out, when they first said what their property, the taxes were going to be, that's in order to sway the JPs into voting in favor of the wind farm. But these wind companies get what's called a production tax credit. In Carroll County, the wind farm that's going in there is going to be built $400 million. And 30% of the construction costs goes in as a production tax credit. That's $120 million. That means they don't start paying the federal corporate taxes until they make, in profit, over $600 million. And if we're trying to save money in this country and reduce our deficit, we don't need to be giving that money away. We are paying for that. And so we should have a say in whether or not they can do that. It's not just, if they were just doing on their property what they want to do with their money, that's one thing. But they're doing it with our money. And as Warren Buffett says, they can't do it without our money. Arkansas needs electricity. And Arkansas is going to need more electricity because Microsoft wants to build a data center. Google wants to build a data center. They'd like to do crypto mining here, but they banned crypto mining in a lot of counties. But we need to be smart about how we generate electricity. It's like Senator Thompson said, the most efficient way to generate energy is to get it from the densest source. Wind energy, they say, well, this turbine farm is going to generate 100 megawatts of electricity, and it's going to power 30,000 Arkansas homes. Well, first of all, they will not commit to selling the electricity in Arkansas. And that 100 megawatts is assuming that it's operating at peak capacity 24 hours a day. The average wind turbine operates at 32% capacity. It's not reliable, and it's like the saying goes, if the wind's not blowing, it's not generating electricity.
And at enough speed.
And have enough speed.
Shell, watershed, what does that put for us? Does that mean that we're incorporated into that? And is that something that could be incorporated into this county's paperwork as far as
the
legalities?
Of course, the wind company can't lease the property that's owned by the federal government. They're not gonna put a wind farm, in other words, inside the Buffalo National River watershed. I think that would be a clear violation of the park.
Correct.
And the legislation says that any wind farm has to be at least a mile away from any state or federal park. A wind farm though, can you imagine 30 wind turbines overlooking the Buffalo National River? It would be
That's
a
the point I was
travesty.
making, yeah.
It would be a travesty.
Is that some kind of legalities that we should put into the verbiage that's going in against Searcy County per se?
Well, Searcy County can adopt a moratorium saying, or they can flat out adopt a ban. The legislation's, the Act 945 says each county can determine for itself if they want to be more restrictive than what this act provides. They can't be less restrictive, but they can be more restrictive.
Where these turbines are being proposed, do we know?
Here, it's my understanding, we've got what we understand to be the location, which
I
is the
saw that
map you
map,
can look
yeah.
at.
Mhm.
But
Let me throw in
it's-
one
it's
thing.
Basically, if you go out toward, what's the name of town?
Marshall, Oxley.
Oxley. On those ridges to the left of the highway, and if you're driving toward Marshall, if you look, if you're Wiley Ranch,
Wally Cove.
and you look back up to the right, those ridges up through there, that's my understanding of where they're proposing. Well, and that's why we're here, because we want you all to know what's going on, and do, you can do something. It's your county. It's up to you all to do something about it.
Where we're at, 9,500 acres is a project area. It started out at 15,568 acres. It's now 9,000 acres, they say. 74+% of it is dense, old growth, hardwood forest. I know, just driving the road, I know there's over 1,000 acres has been brought down to pure dirt. Not one tree was salvaged. Every tree was bulldozed down, then pulled into a back, and all of it was chipped and shredded. Not one tree, no oaks, hickory, black walnut, nothing was utilized. All just chipped up and burned or spread out in the fields.
And we've made several complaints to stormwater runoff people, and they violated some of the stormwater runoff regulations. But basically, the purpose of stormwater runoff is to make sure that nothing migrates from the construction site down into the water systems. Now, how diligently the state enforces that is a different story.
And game and fish?
And game and fish, they basically defer to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife, they're concerned about the killing of the bats and the eagle. There's no federal environmental impact statement required. The other federal regulation that had the most impact on this project was the Federal Aviation Administration. They had to get, anything over 200 feet has to be permitted by the FAA. And they did require that 4 of the turbines be reduced from 650 feet to 544 feet.
This is Mayor Yeager here of Leslie, and he's been in contact, if you don't mind going, Mayor, you want to get the microphone right behind you?
So I can tell you that the Buffalo River watershed is just south of Marshall. That's where it ends, okay? It also, part of Oxley is in the Buffalo River watershed. But what they're talking about in this map that's presented is not in the watershed, okay? It's the edges. So if you're going up towards Marshall and you look off to the right, that's not in the watershed.
Yeah, but when they explode and shoot 2,000 feet, it's gonna be in the water.
Exactly, so, and also up on South Mountain, part of that is not in the watershed as well.
Mine is.
So, there is some that is.
Part of mine's in the Buffalo,
Right.
and part of it is in the Red River watershed.
When I visited with the gentleman, I believe it was Ryan from RWE, he came to City Hall, I asked him, do you have a map of where you're looking at? And this is what he proposed. That's what he showed me, same map.
The pink area here is their development area, right there.
And he also had a more detailed map, and he's looking at about 40 to 50 windmills. I asked him if he had any contract signed as well, and he was elusive when he said it, but he said there's people that are looking at them. And I do know for a fact that there is a large landowner a few miles from here that's looking at doing it, so. Yeah, that doesn't live in the county. I mean, he lives up in northwest Arkansas, but he's got thousands of acres and it doesn't matter to him.
Each county in this state can make their own regulations, including total ban of wind farms in their county. But it's up to the citizens of the county. I can't tell you what to do. We're only here to let you know what we wish we'd have known 10 years ago.
Most of these leases say, if we decide to use your land to build a wind farm, then we can use your land to build a wind farm. That doesn't say, we are going to build a wind farm. In fact, in Carroll County, one landowner was promised 3 turbines on their property. Because, you know, whether or not you have a turbine on your property depends on how much money you get. If you don't have turbine on your property, but you're still part of the farm, you get a lesser amount of money. But they can still use your land for access roads, to transport the electricity, to run control cables, to build outbuildings so they can store all this oil that they're going to use in the turbine, the generator, or their control buildings. That person was told, we're going to get 3 turbines on your property. Well, now that it's being built, they're not going to get any turbines. But their property is still subject to the lease agreement. So another thing about these lease agreements is the most shocking thing I've ever seen as a lawyer. And that is basically the wind farm, the wind developer, as long as they pay you what they promise they're going to pay you, which is the base rate, not, you know, because the more, if you get a turbine, you get more money. If your property is used, but you don't get a turbine, you get a lesser amount of money. But there's usually a base rate that you get. It says as long as we pay the base rate, we can rewrite this lease agreement any way we want to.
It's in there.
We can tell you, for example, if you want to build a barn, after you sign this lease agreement, you got to come to us and ask for permission to build a barn. Some guy who lives in northwest Arkansas who has a large piece of property that's not generating any income. It is the most one-sided agreement I've ever seen, and I've been practicing law almost 50 years.
What about eminent domain? I've heard about that. Is that used in disturbance? What about for the transmission lines? I've heard that. No?
Yes, they can.
Well,
Yeah, they can.
yes, they can.
In Carroll County,
Because
they can.
what the wind developer does is he signs an agreement with Entergy, for example. Entergy says, in that lease agreement, but you don't have to pull it out, I'm telling you what it says, if you need us to use eminent domain for you, we will.
But Energy and Carroll were against it.
Well, but Entergy is not, because they signed a development agreement with Scout Energy in Carroll County. And in that agreement, it says, if you need us to use eminent domain to connect you to our grid, we will do it. You gotta pay for it, Scout, but we will do it. Did that answer your question? Thank you.
And I'm looking to the county, and I've already been on the JPs and saying, hey, y'all need to do something. So, form court meeting, talk to your JPs, find out who your JP is.
Judge?
Yes.
May I make, hopefully I'm not stepping on your toes, please.
No, go ahead.
Go to your quorum court meeting. The JPs cannot make any action without information from you. You're there who tells them what to do. When you go to a quorum court meeting, there is public comment time. You're allowed 3 minutes, Judge? 5 minutes here. 5 minutes, you're allowed to stand up and speak whatever you want, as long as it's concerning county business, and this is county business. So the best suggestion, get a hold of your neighbors, because it's a numbers game, folks. Majority usually wins, right, Judge?
That's how they'll go, who all contacts them, which way they wanna go.
So did I hear right that somebody said that they already knew of a contract signed?
I know of one,
Who is it?
well,
Why are we being secret? Why are we being secret about it?
It's,
Because my neighbors, where I live near Oxley, they said they've been blown up month after month.
I hadn't heard anything.
About these
It's
contracts.
my understanding that they don't have a contract to work on the roads before they can do anything, so. As long as I don't sign a contract where they can get in and out of their places, they're kinda stuck, am I right?
That's true, and they'll come to the county and ask you all to sign a road use agreement. And the other thing
They
is,
work for the people, so.
they're not gonna come here and build a wind farm.
Yeah, I can do that, as long as I'm in there.
And the other thing is, they're not gonna come here and build a wind farm to build 4 turbines. They're gonna want, they wanna get enough land, contiguous pieces next to each other, so they can build 25, 35, 45, 50 turbines. If they don't get as much land as they want, then they won't build a wind farm.
How much land is that in general?
Well, they're gonna put 30 on 9,500 acres in our county.
Anyway, the mayor wants to speak. Let me add one thing in here. This is public information. In 2008, wind company came here to Searcy County trying to build a wind farm then. They had to leave because they could not get enough landowner participation, the number of acres needed to build it. So this is not the first time. You want to say something, sir?
So the last thing I'd like to impress upon you is when I met with Ryan from RWE, he confirmed to me that this is no benefit to us, okay? They're pushing all this energy to Northwest Arkansas. So what's the benefit? You know, what is the benefit? So they're pushing the energy to Northwest Arkansas where the need is, you know, and I do have a dog in the fight, but I don't have personal property in the fight, okay? But it is our area. So
Anyway, I grew up in Illinois. I used to travel Highway 51 or I-39 regularly before I moved to Leslie in 2006. And when I laid my wife to rest in Rochelle, from Bloomington to Rockford, used to be the best black farmland in Illinois growing corn. And when I went there in 2018, it was one solid wind farm with the towers almost too close together to build anything in between, and there was no corn at all being grown. And over a third of them had either lost a blade or caught on fire or was not working. And what I know of the materials those things are made out of, they are toxic waste, they can't be recycled. It totally destroyed the ag economy of Illinois.
Also, one other thing here, folks. All these companies that we've seen, including RWE, there's not one wind farm company that is American owned, period. Most of them go back to China. The company we're dealing with is Scout Clean Energy out of Boulder, Colorado. They're owned by Brookfield Renewables, which is incorporated in the country of Bermuda. Their corporate offices are in Toronto, Canada, and Shanghai, China. All this is available on the internet.
Yeah, I had a question as what the mayor said. I do have a dog in the fight. I've got some property that's in that red zone. And one of the concerns that I have is I have 200 acres, but I'm surrounded by 450 on one side and 100 and something on the other side. There's been rumors that one of them has already talked to RWE. So my concern is the secrecy. Well, I don't understand how come, I'm planning on talking to them on June 12th and saying, hey, I just need to know in that area, but I don't understand the secrecy. Is there a legal thing that we can get to? Because if he's gonna build on it, and then I've already talked to my other neighbor and he's like, no, I'm not doing it. But I also found out today that 20 years ago, they did a wind farm study on the property that I purchased.
Yep.
And the guy that I purchased the property from and his father both had leases that have already expired, but that's how they got the wind study for South Mountain
Wow.
off of my property.
The biggest thing
So
is,
my question, and then I'm like, you know, it goes from South Mountain up to the top of the mountain. I'm at the top of the mountain and I put windmills up there and my neighbors do, everybody in Marshall's gonna see them.
Yep.
If I say, screw that, I don't want that, you know, I'm from Texas, I'm gonna stay at the bottom of my property, people on Nubbin Hill put up wind towers, I'm surrounded by them.
I'm facing the same dilemma. I've got 150 something acres. Every side of my property is that way. And the ridge where I'm looking at, I can get at one point of my road, or I have a lot of road frontage. I can look north to Missouri, it is some approximately 30 miles. And with the naked eye, I can see the spot where the quarry was for the rock to build Table Rock Dam. So they're gonna be able to see these turbines from Branson. From Branson.
So I'm just concerned about the secrecy and I wanna know.
That's where
if
these
it's one of my
non-disclosures
neighbors.
are coming in, where they don't want you to know, because what'll happen is, this is what'll happen. People are getting an uproar, they're gonna go to the quorum court, hey, we want them stopped. And the quorum court's the only one that can stop them, folks, period. Yes, ma'am.
Did you go to the courthouse to look up and see if there's a lease agreement?
Just,
on-
George answered that, he's done that, go ahead.
Lease agreement's binding to the parties. It's only binding on third parties if it's been recorded, or what's called a memorandum of lease, which basically says, you and I have an agreement between ourselves relating to this specific piece of property. It doesn't say what that agreement is, but yes, you can look it up if it has been recorded. But the wind company might not record it until they get enough lease agreements signed to make their wind farm, because they don't want the public to know that they're planning to build a wind farm. RWE, we know, is planning to build one, or they would like to. So you're ahead of the game. You're ahead of the game, well ahead of the game than we were in Carroll County. We didn't know about it until they had already signed the lease agreements for over 15,000 acres.
Yes, ma'am.
They do. When I found that information out today, of course, I called my realtor and then I called my title company and I'm like, hold up. Because I was told it was a 40-year lease, but that has all been, they said that they do have to register them with the county.
They have to register with the county in order for third parties to be bound. So
Right.
that, for instance, if I sign an agreement to sell my property to Richard, it's binding between me and Richard. I could sell it to a third person if Richard hasn't recorded that agreement. And that third person would have the right to the property. Now, Richard could sue me.
Yeah, well, the title company told me, they looked it up and they said that those leases have been expired
Yep.
and released, so.
But
But they do
if we
have to-
research RWE in the property records, and if they have recorded their leases, we would know whether or not anybody has signed them. But I think as of a month ago, there were no such leases recorded.
There's a issue came up last year, at least, it was dealt with, when the Buffalo National River
Yep.
converted to a park,
Right.
and there was such public outcry. A meeting in Jasper,
Yep.
I was
had
there.
about 1,500 participants, and
Yep.
then online, 3,000 or 4,000 people, and they had a meeting in Marshall. What happened? They backed off, and that's.
Like George said earlier, we're here as good neighbors, seriously. We're not getting paid a penny. Everything we're doing is out of our personal pockets. If you want information, if you want what I can do for you, George, Angela, Caroline here, I'm happy to give you my phone number. I hide from nobody. Everybody in Carroll County, I think, not only knows me, they know where I live. Ask them. My lawyer told me that. I got letters from their lawyers already about cease and desist. I'll laugh at it.
We consider that a badge of honor. We're gonna have to close tonight because they have been so gracious. We've way overstayed our welcome. I do want to respond to a couple of things. We did give every one of your quorum court members a package. Now, our packages can be a little thick, but it did include, because I think we would all agree, the best moratorium right now has been pulled together by Boone County. It was an emergency 5-year moratorium. They passed it in one night. I mean, it was a thing of beauty to watch the community come together. Everybody said Boone County would never do that. But anyway, that's the moratorium that we recommend. If you guys can get together and ban it, you will be the heroes of the Ozarks. But we have not been able to do that in any other county, even come close to that. And I do want to, in closing, there's one other person I want to introduce, I meant to introduce earlier, Carolyn Rogers. Carolyn is our JP from District 11. Take a bow, Caroline. She has been over backwards. She has taken tremendous leadership in our county. And so thank you. And also she's here to talk. I mean, if anyone wants to know details about the 5-year moratorium, Caroline can answer a lot of those questions. But yeah, and so we're gonna have to kind of start wrapping up. We got a long drive home tonight, so we got to.
Just remember, it's your county. Your county. I will be